Hello and welcome back to Hill and Ponton's Veterans Disability Blog. I'm Natalia Joffrey, the company COO.
And I'm attorney Annalyn Scott.
So today we're going to keep talking about all things veterans disability claims.
Yes.
And one medical condition that we come across a lot is anxiety. So Anne, would you share what some of the common anxiety disorders are as they relate to veterans disability claims?
Yes, so anxiety, similar with all mental health conditions, it's a symptom, but it's also an actual diagnosis that you can have. And so for VA disability benefit purposes, when we're talking about anxiety, we're talking about an actual diagnosis of anxiety. You'll see this generalized anxiety disorder as an example. There's different phobias that can be diagnosed. Anxiety, like I said, generalized anxiety disorder is what you see most often.
What phobias? I've never heard that before. So are there any phobias commonly associated with veterans claims?
I would say one of them that first comes to my mind is agoraphobia. So that is basically social isolation. Fear of being around people, fear of social situations.
Being in your home.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's one that definitely, when we're talking mental health conditions, symptoms and diagnoses can weave together, overlap, but agoraphobia is definitely one of the anxiety phobias, kind of a subcategory.
So Anne, what are some common symptoms associated with anxiety disorders?
So there's a mix, and it ranges from person to person. You can see physical things like shortness of breath, muscle tension, panic attacks, irritability, a lot of worrying.
Yeah.
There's a whole range. So not just feelings of stress or worry, but also physical things too.
Wow.
Are things to pay attention to.
Okay. What typically happens when you file a claim for service-connected anxiety?
So similar with any claim that you're going to file for service connection, the VA will start developing the claim. So commonly a veteran might get letters asking for treatment records, information if it has to do, service records, things like that. So developing the records. You may get scheduled for a C&P exam, compensation and pension exam, but that's oftentimes done to evaluate not only the severity of a condition, but get an opinion about if something's related to service connection. So getting the claim in is kind of, that triggers the VA to start developing evidence.
Okay. So along that same vein, what can you do to prove that your anxiety disorder was caused or aggravated by your time in service?
So the most straightforward way, which usually does not happen, would be if you have service treatment records showing you were diagnosed with anxiety in service. That doesn't usually happen.
Yeah.
Or at least we don't usually get those cases because,
that would be too easy.
But even if you don't have a diagnosis in service, treatment records showing worry or nerves or sleep problems is very common. That is a way to prove that the diagnosis you have now started in service. When it comes to service connection, more often than not, you're going to need some kind of medical opinion explaining that the symptoms and the condition you have now is related to service.
So that leads into my next question. What kind of evidence would be helpful?
So the medical evidence would be the most helpful.
Okay.
It's not the only type of evidence. The lay evidence, such as statements from friends and family, is really important because medical records, it helps show that a veteran is getting treatment, that there is a problem going on, that there is a diagnosis. But especially with mental health symptoms, sometimes the treatment notes don't really reflect the full picture of what's going on.
Yes.
So getting statements from friends and family that know you really well, see you day to day, spend a lot of time with you, they might have a different perspective as far as how things affect you and the impact on your day-to-day life. So that's helpful as well.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because sometimes it almost seems as if though people that are around the veteran are even aware of how severe certain aspects or symptoms are,
Right.
looking from the outside in.
Right, and it can be helpful, that type of evidence not only showing to the VA, but having a doctor look at those lay statements and explain, medically what those statements are showing. That can be really helpful. So kind of combining the two.
Yeah. Okay. Can you claim anxiety as a secondary service-connected?
Yes. So anxiety and then depression also is a very common mental health condition that can be secondary to other issues. Anxiety specifically, you'll see really any kind of chronic medical condition, orthopedic issues, and the anxiety of just, am I going to be able to function, carry out day-to-day activities, but really, like I said, any kind of chronic medical problem, stomach issues, worrying about how it's going to affect you day-to-day, can definitely lead a better anxiety disorder.
I see those two intertwined a lot, the stomach conditions with the anxiety. So, and sometimes it's almost even difficult to determine which came first. Like
Right.
the anxiety is an aggravator for the stomach condition, or the stomach condition developed as a result of the
Right.
severe anxiety.
And it becomes important as far as being able to determine which came first, as far as what relates to service. So, if the VA is trying to say that you have anxiety because of a medical condition that's not connected to service, you are either going to have to prove how that medical condition is related to service, or have some kind of proof that the anxiety is also due to service. So kind of separating out mental health conditions, that is a tricky part because of how much they interlock. But at the end of the day, it's, do you have the evidence that it at least is likely is not related to something that's related to service?
Right. Because you mentioned both, and they do often go hand in hand, anxiety and depression. Can you have two claims for two different mental health conditions at the same time?
Yes, you can have two claims. For mental health conditions, and the reason I pause is because the rating, you're not going to get rated separately necessarily. I think of mental health conditions in the VA rating as the symptoms need to be rated. So if a veteran has a diagnosis of PTSD and has a diagnosis of anxiety, well, if there's anxiety symptoms that are part of PTSD, you're not going to get a separate rating for your anxiety disorder. So at the end of the day, look and see, does the rating you receive from the VA, does that accurately reflect the symptoms that you're experiencing?
Okay. That's good. Interesting. How does the VA rate anxiety?
Anxiety, as with all mental health conditions, is rated on the general formula for mental health conditions. So it's a scale of percentages from 10% to 100%, not necessarily in an increment level that you would think. There's 30%, 50%, 70, and then 100. So it kind of increases by 20. And that's with any mental health condition is rated with that same formula.
Any big differentiations in between what, I'm sure that it's a massive difference between 10% and 100%. Can you just give us maybe some brief examples of what it would take to get, for example, 10% versus 30 versus 50?
A big difference or kind of factor to think about with anxiety in particular is panic attacks. Anxiety isn't the only mental health condition that panic attacks applies to, but that is specifically addressed in the rating criteria. So I believe 50% is for panic attacks that happen less than 1 week, or less than once per week. Whereas if you're having more than one panic attack a week, you're entitled to a higher rating.
I would hope so.
Yes.
Those are pretty.
The frequency and duration of panic attacks, and that's something that happens a lot with anxiety. So that's one example of kind of how it's differentiated between
the different ratings. Okay. What are some difficulties with anxiety claims?
I would say the fact that mental health conditions are so interwoven. So if the VA may try to say symptoms are related to a condition that's not service connected, that could cause some tricky parts as far as proving your claim, and also just making sure that your rating is correct. The fact that the rating is so subjective. The VA looks at a form, checks things off, but those aren't the only symptoms or problems that you can be rated for. It's more of a guide. So
Right.
Being open and honest and really just having the evidence in the record that shows this level of severity. Because unfortunately, without treatment records and that evidence, we can't make an argument for a higher rating.
Right.
So that's a big, just having the documentation,
Yeah.
even though it's definitely not an easy thing to have to go through.
Right. Just because we were talking about this, and now that you're talking about getting a higher rating, so is unemployability possible based on anxiety?
Yes, and you see it a lot of times. Some of the impairments with anxiety would be, impairing or inability to concentrate. Your focus might be decreased. If you're having a panic attack, you might be basically incapacitated. I mean, it really depends on the individual, but you can't really be in a meeting or talking to customers if you're having a panic attack.
Right.
And headaches, the physical issues that come from that. So fatigue, another one, sleeping problems with anxiety can be a huge problem. And if you're not sleeping, then you're definitely fatigued, and that can lead to performance issues at work. Irritability, another issue, getting along with others. So definitely, I mean, if you can't work and, or in previous jobs you've had problems with supervisors or getting along with others, things like that, definitely have a strong case for unemployability based on your anxiety.
Okay, great. Wow, that was really helpful. Thanks, Anna.
Of course.
If you have any questions or want some additional information, feel free to visit our website or call our office. Otherwise, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.